On the day of her funeral, Clara Whitmore stood in the back of the church, alive. Hidden beneath a black veil, she watched strangers cry. She watched friends whisper. She watched her mother collapse into her sister's arms. But she was only watching one person, Daniel Hayes. And she wasn't there to mourn. She was there to measure his grief. Because sometimes, love doesn't die from betrayal. It dies from doubt. Before we continue this story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more powerful stories like this one. Clara met Daniel at 19. He wasn't dramatic, he wasn't reckless. He didn't make grand speeches. He made promises, and he kept them. For 8 years, they built a life that looked steady, predictable, safe. Daniel was the kind of man who believed love was shown in quiet ways, fixing the sink without being asked, bringing her tea when she worked late, remembering the small things. But Clara didn't want quiet love. She wanted fire. She wanted proof. She wanted to feel irreplaceable. And slowly, doubt began to whisper. That's when Elise Monroe appeared, confident, sharp, effortlessly magnetic. Elise laughed loudly in meetings, touched Daniel's arm when she spoke, texted him after work, just a work thing. Daniel said she was just a colleague. Clara smiled. But at night, she stared at the ceiling, wondering, why doesn't he fight harder for me? Why doesn't he panic at the thought of losing me? He never looked afraid, and that terrified her. Because to Clara, fear meant depth. The night she disappeared, it was raining. Her car was found near Black Ridge Bridge. Driver's door open, phone on the seat, no body. Police called it suspected suicide. Daniel called it my fault. He told detectives she had seemed distant. He told her mother he should have noticed. And when he spoke at the candlelight vigil, his voice broke. Clara watched it all from a motel 2 towns away, alive, planning, waiting. Because this was never about death, it was about proof. She had rehearsed this moment. The funeral would confirm everything. If Daniel shattered, she mattered. If he moved on, she was right to doubt him. So 2 weeks later, Clara wore black, covered her face, and stepped into her own memorial service. White lilies filled the church. Soft organ music trembled in the air. Daniel looked thinner, paler. When he stepped up to speak, he gripped the podium like it was the only thing holding him upright. I loved Clara, he began. His voice cracked. Tears fell. Real tears. Clara's chest tightened. Victory. She mattered. But then, he said something she hadn't expected. I wasn't enough for her. Silence fell across the room. I gave her stability, but she wanted more. She wanted intensity. She wanted constant reassurance, and I didn't know how to give that. Clara's hands trembled beneath her gloves. This wasn't grief. This was confession. Then Elise stood up, not smiling, not smug, just solemn. At least she's at peace now, Elise said quietly. Daniel turned to her. What does that mean? Elise hesitated. You didn't know? The room shifted. She was diagnosed 6 months ago, early onset Huntington's. Gasps echoed through the pews. Daniel's face drained of color. No, that's not possible. She didn't want to burden you. She thought you'd stay out of obligation. Daniel stepped back like he'd been struck. Clara felt her lungs collapse. She never had Huntington's. She had faked medical appointments to hide her preparations. Elise believed the lie, which meant Daniel did too. He wasn't grieving a woman who doubted him. He was grieving a woman who he believed had been suffering alone.
Clara stumbled out of the church. The narrative had shifted. She had wanted to test love. Instead, she had rewritten her legacy. She was no longer insecure. She was tragic, self-sacrificing, brave, and Daniel was drowning in guilt. That wasn't the plan. That night, she returned to their apartment. The lights were on. Daniel stood by the table. A storage receipt lay beside him. Her mistake. He had found it. "You are alive," he said quietly. Not shocked, not relieved, just tired. Clara removed her veil. "I needed to know," she whispered. "Know what?" "If you loved me." Daniel stared at her. "I did." Past tense. It landed like a blade. "You never trusted it," he continued, "so you staged your death." Tears streamed down her face. "I thought you were drifting toward Elise." "Elise was helping me plan your proposal redo," he said. "The one you said felt rushed years ago. I wanted to do it right this time." He opened a drawer. A ring box sat inside, unopened, untouched. She had faked her death 2 weeks before he planned to ask her to marry him again. "I cried today," Daniel said softly. She looked up. "But I cried, not because you were gone." He picked up his suitcase. "I cried because the woman I loved believed I needed to be tested." He walked toward the door. Love without trust becomes a performance. The door closed, and the sound echoed longer than any scream. Clara stood alone in the silence, alive, breathing, but something irreversible had died. She had staged a funeral to measure love, and in doing so, she buried it. Sometimes we lose love because it wasn't strong enough. We lose it because we didn't believe it was real. And doubt is a quiet killer.